Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Museum of Science today for virtual birding. My name is Katie. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm going to be keeping an eye out for all of your questions or comments that you can put into the Q&A for our scientists today. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please know that we cannot see your questions or comments from there at this time, and make sure to visit us on Zoom next time if you'd like that interaction. On Zoom, you can head to the bottom and hit that Q&A button. And if you'd like to see captions, please head down to the bottom also and hit the closed captions button. It may look like a button that says CC. So at this point, I invite our Museum of Science educator to get us started.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan and my pronouns are she and her, and I am very excited to go virtual birding with you today. And the place where we are going birding is the city. And it may not be the first place that you think of to find interesting birds, but by using our senses and making careful observations, it's actually not too hard to find all sorts of birds that live in the urban or city environment. And most of us have noticed maybe pigeons or those little brown house sparrows in the city, and these birds are really interesting to observe. But today, we're going to explore a little deeper and discover some unexpected urban habitats and the birds that live in and migrate through them. And we have a very special guest who is going to help us out. Before I worked for the Museum of Science, I was a scientist and I studied urban birds who live in the city. And I was lucky enough to study under Dr. Claus Holzapfel, who is an associate professor of ecology and head of the fusion ecology lab at Rutgers University Newark. And he has lots of experience birding in the city, so I am delighted to have him here to join us today. So now I would like to invite Claus to go ahead and turn on his camera and microphone and say hello.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me. So if I have to introduce myself, I would say, I'd like to say that I'm actually a plant ecologist who happens to be interested in everything which is alive besides plants as well. So this is a bit of a dangerous side interest, and one of my major side interests in my hobby and in research as well are urban birds. And I'm glad that I can talk about them a little bit today.
Great, thank you so much. Now, before we introduce the bird species that we're going to discover today, I have a few questions for you, Claus. And for our friends who are joining us on Zoom, please feel free to type in some questions if you have anything that you'd like to ask Claus. So my first question is, what do you like most about birdwatching in the city?
That's a good question. What do I like most? It's really sort of finding the unexpected. As Megan said already, we don't expect to see a lot of birds in urban environments because that's a place where we humans are, right? So we build it for us. But it happened to be that there's a lot of wildlife as well, and birds are among them. And what I really like with urban birding is that, as I said, you see things you don't expect, especially during migration times. Almost everything can show up in spring and fall. And I think we will see a few examples in a moment, right?
Yes, we definitely will. Thank you. So you've actually been watching and even tracking urban birds with your students on the Rutgers Newark campus. So can you tell us a little about that and maybe some of the interesting things you noticed? And I'm going to pull up, as you're telling this, a picture of the campus.
Let's see. Yeah, so what you can see here easily is our central campus. Rutgers Newark is relatively small as a campus, but our central plaza has two large areas, or maybe three large areas, which are relatively wild. We were allowed to keep them relatively wild, so we have something like a tiny urban forest in the middle of our campus, which is really interesting because it attracts a lot of migratory birds, also breeding birds, but mostly during migration and fall and spring. And as I said, almost anything can turn up. You never know if you go there, especially in the morning, you never know what you will see. And this is just the exciting thing about urban birding, I would say, that you can't really say, oh, I want to go there to see that one, because you don't know what you get. You might get something even better. And I think there is an example as the next picture, if you can show that.
Yes.
Something you really don't expect in an urban environment is a bird like this, which first of all, you don't see at all because it looks like a piece of wood, but it's not. It's actually has a very interesting name. It's a Chuck-Will's widow, which is mimicking its call, actually. It's a night bird, so they're migrating at night and resting during the day. And several times now, we already in May, especially in May, we find these. So this is a Chuck-Will's widow. This is a close-up. It looks like a tiny bill. It's actually a giant bill. If you think that the bill opens, or the beak opens up all the way to the eye. So it feeds on butterflies or moths mostly, which it can catch easily. The other interesting thing is you think the bird is asleep, but it's not. It's actually looking at me when I took this picture. You see that the eye is is a little bit open and towards the end, towards the back side of the eye. So it's actually watching me very carefully.
Great. And so we have another picture here, Klaus. This is looks like someone has caught this bird. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, so what we are doing on campus is actually we have a bending station. So we're catching birds in mist nets. We're giving them bands. So when we recapture them, we know which individual is which individual. We would like to see, would like to find out if they actually gain weight when they're resting on our campus. This picture is a bit of a trick photo. This is not a Chuck-Will's widow. This is another species very closely related, whippoorwill. Again, a funny name, but that's how the call of the bird is.
Great, thank you. All right. So Kate, let's check in with Katie now. Do we have any questions coming in from the audience for Klaus before we move on?
So we have a few questions that I think will help us get started. There's a question about Rutgers being not technically in New England. And so are there similar birds between Rutgers and what locals to the Museum of Science might see? And also the difference between the kinds of birds we might see in a more urban or a more rural setting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My favorite spot for bird watching in New England. It's interesting that you should ask. Of course, Rutgers is New Jersey, but a while ago, I lived for at least 2 years in Western Massachusetts, and one of my favorite bird watching spots in New England was actually Plum Island along the coasts, especially in winter. Because it's a great place to see all those wintering waterfowl or snowy owls, even a gerfalcon, which is a very northern bird. I saw there once. So I remember New England very well. Urban birding is, I'm trying to, if I would be better prepared for this. There's a cemetery, a famous cemetery in, is it Boston, where bird watchers go. And that's actually sort of a urban site, especially during migration. I should have thought about that. And then the other question about birds, sort of not in urban sites and in urban sites, as I pointed out, during migration in May, especially in May in our region and in New England as well, and in October on the way when birds migrating southwards again, you can expect to almost to see everything in an urban environment, which you would not expect. So there's not a big difference. These migratory birds have to or will stop in urban areas as long as you have a few trees and some greenery, which is kept in a way that it provides them food and places to hide.
Great, thank you. Mm-hmm. All right, so now I think we'll move on to introducing our 3 birds that we're going to talk about today. So first, I'm going to just stop sharing my slides for a moment. All right, so now our first bird And so the three birds that we're going to talk about today are actually a few birds that Claus suggested that he enjoys encountering in the city, and now maybe you will too. So we're going to use our senses to learn about these birds and figure out how they behave and how to identify them. But so before we show you our first bird, we're going to listen to what it sounds like, because listening to bird sounds is a really great way to find birds and to identify them. So I'm going to play the sound of our first bird. Hopefully you will be able to hear this. Should come again here. So has anyone ever heard this bird song before and want to take a guess as to what bird species this might be? Or maybe does this song sound like something familiar to you? So go ahead and enter your ideas in the Q&A. And Katie, can you let us know if anybody has some any ideas as to what bird this might be?
Sure. So we have all sorts coming in: a song sparrow, warbler, finch, a hummingbird, pine warbler, a little more specific.
Great, those are wonderful guesses. And for those of you that guessed warbler, you were right. It is. Our first bird is a type of warbler. So let me just pull up a photo for you here. There we go. Our first bird is a type of warbler called an ovenbird. And these are small birds. They're a type of warbler. They're kind of on the big side for a warbler, but they're a little smaller than a typical sparrow. And these birds are kind of an olive brown color with stripy spots on the chest and an orange and black crown on their head. And if you look kind of closely, you might notice that they also have a white ring around their eye. And these ovenbirds can be found in a whole bunch of different places in the United States and into Canada when they're not breeding. More in the winter time, they can be found down south in Florida, the Caribbean, and maybe Mexico and Central America. And then they migrate north, where they can be found further up north on the east coast of the United States and up into Canada. All right, so now let's take a look at another picture of these birds. There we go. I'm going to play a little video for you here. There we go. Oh, there we go. Now it's playing. Good. So, and I'd like you to take a look at this video and look at how the bird is moving. And in the pictures that we've seen, notice that this bird is on the ground a lot. So can anyone think of what that might tell us about how this bird behaves, or maybe what it eats? Any ideas? Go ahead and type your ideas into the Q&A. And Katie, let us know if anybody has some thoughts to share about maybe what this bird eats.
Sure, we had some great observations here. We have bugs, plants, worms and bugs, insects, that it uses camouflage also to find its food.
Oh, interesting. Those are wonderful observations. And definitely, this bird is definitely looking for insects, walking around in the leaf litter. Great observations. Claus, I would love to hear from you. Can you tell us a little more about this bird and maybe some thoughts on observations you've made of this bird on campus?
Yeah, so I'm glad that you show this video, because it shows that it's foraging in the leaves. And this is actually something we always like to point out. It's very important that leaves stay on the ground. So leaf blowers are not a good idea, because this is where this bird finds its food, the insects which live in the leaf litter. So that's here. This picture here shows, I guess it's me holding an ovenbird, one of our heaviest ovenbird we found, actually, which showed us that they actually gain a lot of weight while they're foraging on our campus. And we keep leaf blowers out of our natural little reserves and therefore providing food. I saw a question before if it's not hurting the bird when we're holding them like this. It doesn't, because there are safe ways of holding a bird, and we let them go afterwards, of course. And sometimes we capture them after a few days again, so they don't hold a grudge, apparently. There was one question I saw, that how do we catch them? So we put nets out, very thin nets. They're called mist nets. They're hardly visible for birds. They fly in it. We take them out as fast as possible. That doesn't really harm them as well. We put the band and we weigh and measure something, let them go. In some cases, and here you see one Ovenbird, which is proudly showing its colored bands, leg bands. We do this in order to recognize them from far away individually. So we follow them around a little bit and see where they forage and what they eat, and how these urban sites are important for them to fuel up during migration. This is actually important because next night, most of them fly at night, they will go on and migrate further. And here's, this picture I like as well. This is an Ovenbird which spent the winter with us. There was enough food on campus for this bird, apparently. It's supposed to migrate southwards, but it stayed, and it's here sitting on a cold morning on top of a garbage can, because that was the warmest place it could find. But these birds actually make it through the winter as well.
Great, thank you. That was fascinating. All right, so let's move on to our next bird. I know we've learned a little bit about ovenbirds, which are a very unexpected bird to see in the city, but so adorable. I love them. And one thing I forgot to mention too is if you're listening for ovenbirds, a good way to remember that sound is that it sounds like they're saying teacher, teacher, teacher over and over again, and it kind of gets louder and louder. So they have a nice recognizable song too, which is great. Okay, but now we're going to move on to our next bird. And again, let's start with the sound of this bird. And this one is going to be quite different from the last sound that we heard.
Absolutely.
And we'll tell you more about what this sound is and why it's doing this in a little bit. All right, so does anyone recognize this bird sound? Does anyone think they might know what this bird is from hearing it? Any guesses? Katie, let us know if we have any thoughts on what this bird might be.
Ooh, we have a lot of guesses for ducks, or a mallard duck, a catbird.
Oh, those are great guesses. Duck is a really good guess. So this is actually a really interesting bird. I'm just gonna pull up my slides again here so we can show you this really interesting bird. Yep. There we go. This bird is the American woodcock. And it is also, correct me if I'm wrong, Klaus, it is also sometimes called a timberdoodle.
Yes.
Which I just wanted a reason to say the word timberdoodle.
Yeah,
So these birds are kind of about this, they're kind of short and squat and about the size of a robin. And so looking at this bird, you can see that it has this kind of long bill. And so these birds are found, see, there we go. So woodcocks are found mostly on the eastern side of North America in the United States. And so year round, they can be found sort of southeast and into central North America all year, and then during the breeding season, they can be found a little further north to eastern to central United States and up into Canada. And now again, I'm going to play a little video of the woodcock here for you. And as I'm playing this video, think about what this bird is doing. And again, this bird is like the ovenbird, is often on the ground. Now take a look at its bill, right? It has this really long bill and it's sort of bobbing around here in the leaf litter. What do you think this tells you about what this bird is doing? What do you think it's up to here? What do you think do you think maybe it's trying to find food? And if so, what kind of food?
So we have similar guesses to before: grubs, worms, spiders, using its beak to dig, maybe maybe nibbling on some roots. Oh, I like this description: pulling the insects out.
Mhm.
Yeah, those are great observations. Klaus, do you want to tell us a little more about what the bird is doing?
Yeah, I was afraid you will ask me that, because this very funny movement you see, this bobbing, I'm not really sure if this is fully understood why the bird is doing that. It's a very funny movement. It might have to do with scaring earthworms out of their holes or make them moving so the bird can actually either smell or see them. But the long bill definitely is for probing. So this, and you see here a picture, we're doing research on these woodcocks as well. Measuring the bill length because the male actually has a shorter bill than the female. So we can tell if this is a female. This is actually a male. There's a bit difference between them. And the reason I actually asked to show the woodcock is because it's a strange bird, very peculiar looking bird, but it's also a forest bird. It's actually systematically a shorebird and related to the red knots and all these other birds along the shore, but it decided during its evolution to become a forest bird. And it's showing up during migration in urban sites as well. That's the reason it's selected here. So you might be able during, especially in the fall, to see a bird like this if you manage to see it, because as you see, it's quite well camouflaged. Our lab is doing research on woodcocks, urban and suburban woodcocks as well. And this is a graduate student, Kathleen Farley, and she's studying the ecology of these birds when they nest in post-industrial sites. You can see the background is Manhattan. Actually, this is an old rail yard, which became very natural and over the last 60 years became a, sort of an urban wilderness, and woodcocks really like places like this. So we're trying to find out why they do like these places and how much food, again, they can find in places like this, where you actually don't expect this. This was an industrial site, and Megan worked on this site as well. That's Liberty State Park.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's a fascinating place.
Yeah.
And so we have one final little video here to show. Klaus, do you want to tell us what this is?
Yeah, they're weird birds, as you can see. That's all what I can say. This is during their displaying and advertising, basically, to find a mate like that. They're adorable.
They are. I love woodcocks. They are fantastic. All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Klaus, for telling us a little more about woodcocks and some about the research that is going on with them. That's great. So now let's move on to our third bird that we're going to talk about. And once again, we are going to start off with the song of this bird. So I'm going to or not the song, I'm sorry, the call of this bird. And it's actually typically a pretty quiet bird, but if you do hear it, it will sound something like this. Or would anyone like to guess what they think this bird might be? Any thoughts?
Man, I don't know that I have a guess, but I definitely feel like I remember hearing that as a child. I feel, yes, there's one guess here, maybe a woodpecker, which is what I might be thinking. A chickadee, blackbirds.
These are awesome observations. Yeah, it does sort of resemble the sound of a woodpecker. Yeah. So actually, this bird, let's go ahead and bring it up for us. It's not a woodcock. It is a Cooper's hawk. These are really beautiful raptors or birds of prey, and they are about the size of a crow. And they're kind of gray on the backside, and they have this kind of reddish stripy, these reddish stripy feathers on the front. And Cooper's hawks can be found, they're really widespread in North America. So year round, they can be found throughout a lot of the United States, and even up into Canada when they're breeding. So really widespread, really neat birds. So now let's take a closer look at these Cooper's hawks, and you can see that they have this hooked bill. It looks kind of sharp, and they have these grasping claws that they're holding onto the branch with. So does anyone have an idea what this might tell us about this bird? Any thoughts on what it eats or how it behaves based on what it looks like here?
We have a hypothesis that that bird could eat other birds, or at least meat, maybe mice?
Yeah, those are great guesses based on the observations that you're all making about these birds. Klaus, do you want to tell us a little more?
Yeah, the reason I selected the Cooper's hawk is because it's a forest bird, which can be found in urban environments. It's actually one of the birds which became sort of, don't play the video yet, became an urban bird, which was a very shy forest bird, but now it's moving into suburbs and urban areas as well, because this bird or this species found out that there are actually lots of birds in the city which they can eat, and therefore they do this. So I selected the Cooper's hawk just to show you that nature is really in cities as well, and in urban environments as well. It's not all fun and feathers. So there's also the serious part of nature eaten and being eaten. And so these two pictures show actually a female on the left and a male on the right. It's interesting to note that the female is actually bigger in this species. In most birds of prey, the female is bigger and the male is smaller. Not really understood why that is. Maybe they feed on different things, but it might be also that the female is larger because when they're nesting, it has to convince the male to give up the food for the nestlings and for the little hawks. And the best way of doing is to be bigger and intimidate the male.
Wow. And so we have a little video here, Klaus. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're going to see?
Yeah, so it's, as I said, that's a serious part of nature. Here, two of our birds from today are meeting. There's a woodcock on the right and a Cooper's hawk. And obviously you can see what happened to the woodcock.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. These birds that you wouldn't typically think you'd find in the city are actually there, and they're also, they're feeding on each other, and they have all these behaviors that are happening in this really urban environment, and that is really, really remarkable. All right, well, thank you so much, Klaus. That was fascinating. I think we have just a couple minutes left. Katie, if there's any sort of questions that people have that we haven't had a chance to answer, we can maybe take a minute or two to try to get to a couple of those.
Sure. We do have a question asking if you would share your favorite North American bird.
Mm-hmm.
That's a tough question.
All of us. Yeah, so I can start. So my trick answer is usually, well, this bird is one of the 10,000 favorite birds I have, because there are about 10,000 birds in the world. But in North America, I would think I would actually choose the Ovenbird, mainly because I'm working with it, but it's a very cute little bird walking on the ground, and sometimes very trusty. It might just walk up to you on a sidewalk, especially in an urban environment again. So I think I would choose the Ovenbird.
Oh, that is a good one. Ovenbirds are great.
So
I have,
yeah.
I wonder if, Klaus, you're going to think that I might say a house wren because I worked with them. But it's actually not. As much as I love house wrens, and they're definitely a bird you can find in the city, I think my favorite bird is probably a red-tailed hawk, because it was the first bird that I ever learned to identify. And I was so amazed at how they're kind of everywhere, and you can just be like driving down the highway or anywhere and just see this like majestic, gigantic bird flying around. And it was sort of my gateway into loving birds. So that is my favorite bird.
I have one more question that I think will be great to end with. What is the best time to observe birds in the habitats that we live in? Maybe it's dawn or dusk. So for all of us to leave this and know how to best be scientists ourselves.
The best time usually is early in the morning. So that's when birds sing. So if you're in an area where they're nesting, the morning is the time when they advertise, in the spring at least. And they're mostly active in the morning as well, and then a little bit less during the day. In an urban environment, that's also, when you're in the city, being early means there are less people around. So you have the birds for yourself before they're sort of trying to find places to hide away. But and in addition, one thing, if I can mention that, Most migratory birds, the small birds at least, migrate at night. They fly at night and they find a place to rest in the morning. So if you're there and like an urban little forest in the morning, you will see them coming in and you will see them being very active. So that's the best time to see them.
Great, thank you. All right, well, that looks like it's all the time we have. So I'm going to pass it over to Katie to wrap us up. But thank you so much, Klaus. It's been wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for virtual birding with us today.
Katie, what's your favorite bird?
Oh, my favorite bird is the great blue heron. I actually grew up next to a little pond, and it was always the most exciting thing when they would fly over.
Okay.
They are dinosaurs for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you hear them. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our guest, Klaus, and thank you to Megan for putting this all together. And thank you to all of you for coming here and being amazing scientists and asking wonderful questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but please do check out our offerings at mos.org/MOS at home. Keep coming back, keep asking questions. We'll keep trying to get to you. And if you enjoyed this program, consider visiting engage.mos.org/welcome to help us do even more of them. We'll see you soon.